Welcome to Dear Business Coach, the podcast. My name's Elizabeth. Find one thing to move your business forward today with conversations, spotlights, interviews, articles, and free resources. Listen and follow and subscribe on social media. Dear Business Coach pages and groups. Dear Business Coach podcast. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and don't forget Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, anywhere you listen to podcasts. All it takes sometimes is one little thing to move your business forward today. Okay, so Howard Lim, welcome to the Dear Business Coach podcast. How are you today?
Good, fantastic. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday. So glad that we could meet. And this is in the first time that we've had a chance to record, and I know that we've talked before, so I have a lot to learn from you today. What I have in front of me is your about section actually on howcreative.com. And so Howard A. Lim, an award-winning business and brand architect. Howard A. Lim designs businesses from the inside out. A disruptive innovator who shifts paradigms, Mr. Lim and his boutique full-service firm, How Creative, partner with business owners worldwide to develop and execute world-class leading businesses and authentic brands. A highly sought-after speaker, author, and organization advisor for over 35 years, Mr. Lim has represented everyone from emerging entrepreneurs to established Fortune 500 companies, including Apple, Disney, Paramount, Xerox, Oracle, Cirque du Soleil, Mattel, AT&T, and HP. His contributions have added billions to clients' profits while increasing brand value and company equity. The author of Authentic Branding, Mr. Lim is a frequent and popular speaker, regularly hosting seminars and workshops the world over. Mr. Lim has taught more than 100,000 business owners how to build distinctive, world-class brands that connect intellectually and emotionally with customers. Mr. Lim's an advisor to many organizations, including Cal Poly's the College of Liberal Arts Dean's Advisory Council, Malibu Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, INPEX, and ICANN. He is also the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the Euro Invent Ambassador of Innovation Award, INPEX Lifetime Achievement Award, and ICANN Speaker Award. So I have had the pleasure of looking through some of this detail, and you know, I didn't realize how much impact, you know, how many people you are actually working with on a regular basis. And so I'm excited to hear some couple of highlights and stories as much as we have time for. So Mr. Lim, will you please tell me a little bit about what's in this introduction? What are we talking about today with you?
Well, what we're going to talk about really is like the most valuable asset a company can own is really their brand if it's done right. Okay, so unfortunately, most companies have what I call a generic or a brand that's a liability for them rather than a brand that builds equity so they actually can create more value for all their different stakeholders, meaning they're not only their listening audience, but let's say investors, let's say the media itself.
Okay, that's really interesting. So even the media itself. So that's a framework, a mental framework that I hadn't really thought about before. You said that your brand could potentially be a liability. How could that be?
Because most people don't design a brand, they do it by the hip. And the point being is that regardless if you think you're branding or not, you are. As long as you're sending a signal out to a customer or a prospect or just people in general, like let's say a website, let's say the company name, for example, just a couple of little what are called touch points. If they're not really expressing the full value of what you have to offer, they're actually being disservice to you because they become a repellent rather than an attractor. In other words, if you have a website, because what happens quite often is when I talk to clients and I'm speaking to them and I ask them what makes them unique, what makes them more valuable than their competitors, and then as I'm looking at their website, nothing reflects what they just told me.
Mm-hmm.
Example. Okay. That's just one example. Another example would be like the name of the company could be like it's too long or it's not. There's like five ways of naming companies. And a lot of times companies are not distinct enough the way they're being named because it could be too generic or too descriptive, but it starts to sound like any other company. That itself becomes a liability as far as want to have some stickiness in the mind of the consumer, which I call real estate. So the more real estate you could own in a mind to be instant recall to your target market, the more that you'll be able to produce more revenue because the more top of mind you are to them. So that's why I mean that most companies have, I would say over 90% of companies, they have their brand as a liability where it's not working for them, it's actually working against them.
Okay, so that's interesting. Sometimes when I look at a website, if it's formal enough looking, or if it has enough of the right kinds of transition features visually, I start to feel something about the brand. And then often, like you said, maybe there's something there that doesn't match what I was looking for, or I can't really figure out what I'm supposed to do when I get there. And sometimes I look at a website like that and I think, well, maybe I'm not really supposed to interact with this website. Maybe that's the design of it, but I don't really know as a consumer. So, um, is that something like what you were talking about as far as like what's the interaction point between the brand and the end user?
Yeah, exactly. So what you're describing is exactly correct. And so a website, most websites, first of all, they're not designed properly. In other words, you're right, the website has to be engaging and it has to be clear on what problem it's solving and who it's for and how are they solving that problem uniquely. Most websites do not have that simple but yet super important theme. What problem are you solving? Okay, what's the problem? What problem are you solving? And how are you solving it uniquely? And you're right. What you just mentioned too is what to do next. That's call to action, a CTA. And a lot of people don't have a CTA. Like, want to learn more? Click on here and let's set up a 10-minute call. Okay, so that way you could actually now start to market to them. So, yeah, and what I was referring to as touch points is every communication point that you are actually bringing out to the world. That could be a business card, that could be the name of the company, the tagline, the sales force, the packaging, the product designing, the storefront, the billboards, the advertising, the marketing, the social media. Those are all touch points. Those are all ways of communicating who you are. But if you don't have a central theme of who you are, then you end up being what I call the SIP effect, where you have multiple personalities. That also becomes a liability for a company.
That's great. Okay, so this is something that I haven't heard in the marketing from marketing experts, that a company can seem to have multiple personalities. So that's really funny. So what does that look like or feel like?
Well, what that looks like is like the misuse and consistency of from exactly what you're saying, like the look and the feel. Let's say the font usage, the color usage. So let's say I go to your website and then you send me a company brochure and it looked like there are two different companies. Guess what? You're diluting the value of the company just by that alone because you're not being identifiable in the mind of the consumer. Okay. Can you imagine like if Apple, like all their campaigning looked different, and if you look at all their product, there's a similarity to all the product, which is minimalist design. It's
Mm.
gone to the most universal shapes, the simplest shapes, so they have a timeless feel to them. They're the first company to figure it out because Steve Jobs happens to be a whole brain thinker. So he was very logical as well as being very creative. And that's why I want to create a more intuitive, a beautiful piece, literally like a beautiful piece of artwork, which they've have won a lot of awards for their product designing. But the point being is that there's a similarity between all their products. They're still the only computer companies that figured this out so far.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, recently I was watching some sort of documentary and I saw a clip in this show, somebody who had all of these collectible pieces. He had like all of the versions of the Apple computer or different versions of the Apple devices. Really, really something there. They have their own museum line. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Because they gone through an evolution to a point where they figured out why don't we just stick to the minimalist looking, before Steve Jobs unfortunately passed away. And he finally got to that level of when I'm saying simplicity, the most universal shapes in the universe are square, circles, and circle, squares, and triangles. So you
Hmm.
took a square, and you can't get any simpler than a square. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they figured that out, and so there's a unity between all their pieces. Well, that's how brands get recognized. That's where after a while, and people confuse brand with marketing, by the way. Once a brand takes enough hold in a marketplace, guess what? You don't need as much marketing because now you build enough trust and enough awareness in the mind of the consumer that they understand what you stand for, what's making you unique, and who you are for.
So what that's you're kind of looping to where I wanted to go with you here in a minute is uh understanding the bridging. Everybody wants to know, okay, why do some people say that's branding and sales, or marketing and sales are not the same thing? And then at the same time, I, from a background of being in the most generic kind of sales, is just on a telephone, in a call center, I know that it's important to have the customer's data just as much as it is to get the sale. And so in that situation, I would think of the conversation as a touch point, getting a mailing address as a touch point, and then that point where somebody actually hands you payment and trusts you with payment. You're making me think about that process, right? So I could have the Dear Business Coach podcast logo, which is going out there on social media ads, and that's like something to do to keep people top of mind of the name and the logo. However, to get somebody to click on something or interact with me and be available when they do is a different story. So when somebody gets to that point where they do want to interact with me or give me personal information or payment, I need to represent again what it is they saw from that first image. So I'm keeping top of mind this idea that you said earlier about also the messaging needs to match, I guess, in my words, from beginning to end. So I think that's really hard for a lot of us to do. So do you have, is that what makes you the master? It's getting into my organization and helping me make that more solid.
Yeah. So what you're speaking of, and that's the reason why I wrote my book. I wrote my book about 15 years ago, and it's very, very relevant, more relevant today than when I wrote it because I actually could foresee. I know this sounds kind of odd, but I'm a visionary, so I foresee how things were going to shift with the younger generation. Now the younger generation is not so young anymore, but I could see the shift of what was happening. So I wrote a book on branding that gave people exercise called Authentic Branding, and exactly what you're saying is like most people, when they read this book, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was really, that I was missing these key components to build my brand. What you're referring to is what's called the core message. So, yes, what I do is I work with clients, a 1 day session, a 3 day session, and I'm looking at the elements that will build the best foundation to build the tallest building, and then what would be the DNA to actually build a company and build its brand so it can continue to grow in the straightest line, heading north, okay? Versus like how most companies go, okay, let's head north, no, let's head south, no, let's head east. And they're trying to figure out who they are, but there's no system or no structure they put into place to actually direct them. So again, what you're speaking about is what's called the core message. What is your core message? And it should be 21 words or less.
Are you a LinkedIn user? If you are, you can join me for LinkedIn Live Audio with Elizabeth every week, usually on Mondays at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I will have a LinkedIn Live Audio where we talk about podcasting for executives who speak and podcasting for team leaders who speak. These are the themes that are currently running. If that sounds like something you're interested, visit me, Elizabeth Walker at Work, on my LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
Not easy to do.
No.
but essential to exactly what you're saying, because now you have that core message that the website starts to reflect that. Your social media starts to reflect that. As you're having your sales team out in the field, start to reflect that core message. And that core message, by the way, is what value are you creating for your target market that is unique to them? Okay. And it's unique in the marketplace that adds more value than any other company. Okay. And everybody has what I call the back end story to make them
Okay.
unique, to make them authentic. That's why I came up with a book called Authentic, because what's authentic to you, not to copy someone else, but to make it about your company from who you are, what you do, and what makes you truly unique from all others.
So do you have a, formula that you like to use when coaching someone? How do we pull out this backgrounds? I was going to use the word story, but how do we do this if we I mean, everybody has a little bit of a story, but maybe it was just to put something down on paper.
Right. So exactly right. So what happens is that I created a system, and it works better than conventional methods. Like usually you have to hire someone that's a business planner, and then you got to hire someone that's a branding person, and you got to hire that someone's in right? So I created a system that's called SIM, S-I-M, and the S stands for strategy. And that's where I get into a 1 day, 2 day, and a 3 day master blueprint, what I call master blueprint. The first day is what I call a 1 day is what I call the essential blueprint. Okay. And then I call the 2 day and the 3 day is really the master blueprint. And what I'm looking at is what's going on with the business model. So what's unique about that business model that you built, and what can we do to make it even more powerful? So what I'm doing literally is collapsing two worlds together, is the business world and the branding world, to create something that has more value, to actually kind of like you could say supercharge the company to get where it's going faster and change its trajectory. So the first is strategy. So I strategize with companies with a 1 day to a 3 day session where we're looking at, again, the foundation, and we're looking at how we make it so it's unstoppable, to have literally no glass ceiling. Like there's endless amount of capacity, and what can we build as far as like this future that we never thought was possible. And then the I stands for implementation now. Now that we're clear of who you are, what you do, what makes you unique, and designing from the inside out, meaning your business model and your culture, now we're going to look at what needs to be upgraded. So now that we figured out who you are, what your core message is, what your brand promise is, then I look at your current material, like your website, your sales strategies, and I look at in let's say your social media, and I look at, well, where's the alignment between who you say you are now to now that we do have it written in paper, you're exactly right, to how you see what is your full potential, and how are you viewing yourself now. And there's usually this huge gap that needs to be filled. So you're saying you're, on a 10 point scale, you're a 10, but what you're saying to your website, to your social media, is more like a 4. Well, now we got to make sure that we bridge that gap. So now there's an equilibrium between the value that you create, okay, for others, and how you're being represented through your identity. Okay, that's the implementation. And then the M stands for management. And that goes into what you talked about. That's when a lot of times I coach my clients so they actually adapt their brand, and so they actually live and breathe branding, because branding is a whole language in itself. So they actually have so much ownership of their brand. They know exactly how to maneuver in certain situations to not damage their brand, but to build more value behind their brand with their team. So that's the M. So it's strategy, implementation, and then management. Some people start with management first. They go, Howard, I just need your coaching right now. Let's just get me heading in the direction north, and then we'll start with that.
Here. Okay, so I smell a story, right? So what happened? So I would to go ahead and skip to the M, management, right? But you might have a story to share about how somebody how are you helping us avoid mismanagement, the gap between where you say you are, or at least when you're in a private session with Howard Lim, I might be telling you what my value is, and that is, I can share that with you maybe through testimonials with my customers or what have you, that information I have about what the value actually is. And then you said something there where there's a big gap between that, what the customer's seeing,
Yeah,
and you're saying that there's this huge potential factor that I feel like
exactly.
you're helping us tap into.
Exactly. So when you read that I've helped out, like I've spoken to literally more than 100,000 business owners, what I looked at was what was missing with most businesses was a common thread. And what I found out too is most businesses are only reaching 25% of their potential. And I'm talking too with companies I've met that are already in hundreds of millions of dollars and they want to get to the $1 billion mark, or in the $1 billion, they want to get to a higher multiplier. What I find is that they're only designed their company, they've only designed their brand. They have actually, quite honestly, they haven't designed their brand, so they're only reaching 25% of their capacity because they put a lid on it because it has not been designed properly. Okay, so you're right. So when I go through this process, I have this list of questions I ask to get specific ingredients, what I call the DNA ingredients. Like, what's the
Mm,
promise? What are you promising your customers? What is your core message? What is your philosophy? What is the personality behind the brand? What is the architecture behind your brand? Like language they've never heard of before, but are
yeah.
so essential for growth and scaling the company and exiting the company, by the way. So it's worth a lot more when you want to sell the company. I've had a lot of my clients sell their company far greater than they thought was even possible. Like literally, one of my clients I spoke to 3 weeks ago just sold her company to literally, I'm not kidding, to Mr. Toyota wanted to buy her company, and she didn't know who it was knocking on the door. But the point being is that we create so much value because now we had ingredients as if they're a Fortune 500 company without having to spend like one, but are positioned like a Fortune 500 company as a giant magnet to get the ideal customers they want.
Yes. So you use the word multiplier,
Mhm.
and that is a great word maybe to share with me and our listeners what exactly that word means, because I think I understand that, for example, you've also mentioned, what if you want to sell your company? So if
Right.
you want to sell your company, it's let's pretend that I'm a private company. I have to figure out a way to go to the marketplace and show what the company is worth to even get potential offers. And so I know that the word multiplier might have something to do with that. What's a multiplier?
Okay. So let's back up a little bit. What
Okay.
causes a multiplier is that first you got to have the right brand. It has to be by design. And most businesses, over 90% of companies, I say probably closer to 95% of companies, are simply not designed with a world-class brand. They're just doing it from the hip. Okay. The second thing is that when it comes to, let's say you design it properly, what happens now is what I referred to earlier is called brand equity. Brand equity, most people don't even know. Even people that say they do branding. By the way, everyone I met that say they do branding, I only met 2 people that actually do branding in the last 37 years. It's a very complex world, and these people have worked with the only people I know that are really good at branding have worked with Fortune 500 companies because they understand the complexity and understand what it really takes to grow a company globally.
Mm.
Okay. So the point being is this: when it comes to, let's say, Apple, well, we could take any company like Nike, but let's take Apple, okay? Because I've been a fan of Apple ever since they came out in the late 70s, early 80s. That's how I started my company, by the way, is using a Apple product and making what was possible. The point being is this: Apple, when it comes to brand equity, is tangible and the intangible. So Steve Jobs
Mm.
hired the best at the time, the best designer in the world, to design his mark, and then he hired experts around him, which is the first thing to do the right thing, right? If it's not your job, it's not your genius. So he hired the right experts, the right teams to build a world class brand because one, he was clear of his vision. So he hired the right people, raised the right money, and what started to do as a natural brander, quite honestly, he started to build what was called is naturally build a brand equity. It's like, what does Apple mean, which became an arbitrary name between Apple fruit and Apple the computer, right? how is he going to build it so then people actually understand Apple that he's building? It's not the fruit, but a computer. At the time, it was a computer. In fact, they dropped computer because it was a limiter. And so he built this whole campaign about how it's differentiating from all the other computers that are out there, which were quite honestly, he was the first really to be, create a laptop, right? So he was
Mm.
really the only, the big computers are the mainframe computers, like IBM, right? So
Yeah.
here he is, right, with a private, a public, small computer, personal computer. And so what he did is, okay, here's the big computer frame houses. Here I am. And who's this for? He designed the Apple computer for the creatives. He wanted a user-friendly interface. He was very clear what he wanted, and he wanted a well-designed computer. He didn't care how much it's going to cost. He just wanted something that was done right. Okay.
Mm.
He wanted quality. And so all when he was building his quality computer, it started to get known for such a thing. And it also started to get known that it was user-friendly interface versus the PC world, Windows world, but it also was known to get it was the first use of really good use of typography and print and in the design world that you couldn't do with PC. What
Mm.
happened was that Apple started to get more and more known for what it is wanted to be known for, which is the creativity, excellence, quality, okay, and giving that tool to the average Joe rather than and having it was affordable as well. So that's what I mean by brand equity. So when people hear Apple or see the brand mark, Apple, they have this association of what it stands for. You see how that
Yeah.
works? That's brand equity, and that's what actually moves what's called brand value. And this is how it works in the stock market of what could be the potential earnings of how well known is a brand known in its space, in its unique space, in its market space. And so when it's going more global and it starts to multiply out, right, it becomes easier because it starts to build momentum because it's starting to get known for what it wants to be known for. Most companies don't even know what they want to be known for, right?
So I like the way you say that because I would say something like, what is a brand known for? And you are the first person that I've talked to who's using the language, what do we want to be known for?
Right. Exactly. So here's a killer thing too, Elizabeth. I'm a firm believer in this because I was in a lot of focus groups for a lot of big companies. And I never believed in focus groups. In fact, I
Okay.
stopped going to focus groups because I said it's a waste of time. And here's the reason why. And Steve Jobs the same way. I'm not saying at all in Steve Jobs, but I'm just saying that he did not rely on the consumer to tell him what they needed because the consumer didn't even know what they needed.
Mhm.
Okay. The iPad and the iPod would have never existed if he said, "What do you need?" Okay, it doesn't work that way. It starts with creativity, and that's where it misses a lot too. Because when I work with business plans, and strategic planners, they're looking from the standpoint of non-creativity. They're looking at what is so right now without having a creative right side of the brain, looking at what's possible first. When you look at what's possible first, you can create something that has so much more value. Okay. So there's a lot of companies that, in my opinion, are designed inappropriately in a sense that they're going to reach a cap very soon rather than thinking from the
Mm.
standpoint of creativity first. And it kind of goes back to Albert Einstein, where he says, what's more important than knowledge is imagination.
Mhm.
Okay. There's a reason why these geniuses say what they say, because it's true.
Yeah, I think that some of the neatest people to follow in history for me are people who are scientists who love art and find ways to communicate that through their writings. And so, do you have an artistic background?
Well, what you're referring to, and that's what I do have, is a whole brain. So I'm much I'm left and analytical. I'm creative on my right brain, which is creativity, experience, and connection. And so that's how Steve Jobs was, quite honestly. He's a whole brain thinker, and that's why he's able to bring his company so far in the future. And quite honestly, Elon Musk is the same way. It's like because when you think that way, it's like being a supercomputer, and it's not a bragging thing. It's just I got it from my dad. It's like but the point being is that you think of things, you could think of things very abstractly, but then you could think of how that's going to work. Like you figure out I reverse engineer all the time. I help companies with their vision, and I look way into the future, and I literally can reverse engineer in a practical way how we're going to get there.
Well, that yes, well that takes that, as you said, takes a lot of vision, and then if you have the skill set, as you say, the whole brain is the way that you're saying that is, it takes that to be able to put the vision and the practicalities together. So I well, that's what you're telling me. I don't think I have a whole brain, but it's fascinating because I can feel both sides of I have an interest in both of those worlds. So being able to watch and listen to you, who's done this professionally, is fascinating. And also you are bringing you're bringing to the front here something that's interesting too about these companies who can be these global brands but are appealing to folks like us who are craving this like creative connection too. So maybe you can say something about that too, right? If Steve Jobs and his team is able to put creativity first, I mean that's the essence of be walking the walk and talking the talk.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is I always say, I tell companies one of the reasons why too their brand doesn't work because they think they know what they think they know branding, they don't. So they try doing branding themselves. I've
Hmm.
seen it time and time and time again, but they're not understanding the language of branding, so they can't get very far. It's like your output is only good as your input. Okay. So it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. Okay. So I always say, and it's true, I heard this from a friend, if it's not your genius, it's not your job. And so like Steve
Mhm.
Jobs, Elon Musk, they all hire pros to fill in that space. And it does take trust, but you know what? That's what makes companies unstoppable, right? If each expert knows what they're doing and are working together as a team and are rolling together based on a client's vision. That's why we start with the client's vision. Boom, we're going to move, like we're going to set ourselves to Pluto versus just the moon, right? So yeah, all this stuff makes a huge difference when it comes to building, again, growing a company and scaling it. You got to first start off with the right foundation, but you have to look and examine what's there. And when it comes to creativity, I'm a firm believer in co-creating with my clients. So I'll, like when it comes to like showing like name, right now I'm going through a whole naming process. We've come up with hundreds and hundreds of names. And there's
Hmm.
5 ways you can create a name around a brand. If we have time, I could get into that. But the point being is that each name is actually anchored into the strategy session that we did. We did a 1 day essential branding session, which I call a positioning session day. We're positioning a brand and what's going to position it uniquely from the competition. And then names are then derived from that. So now it's not like naming a baby, it's like naming a company with a position in mind of how it's going to stack up for the competition. Okay. So what I do is I educate my clients as I'm going through this creative process, even though they may not be creative, so they understand why we've come up with these different names and how they're actually they work, because it's all based on the strategy session that I pulled out from their soul, you could say, the answers that I was looking for of
Hmm.
their vision, their philosophy, their core values, their core message, and other key elements like this. So now we know through science and through business, it's aligned through that. The creativity is being aligned through that. So yes, I do get my clients involved on on all the creative, you could say milestones, not all that happens in the background, because I know their time is very precious. But when there's a critical decision to be made, I will present to them, like say, an array of different colors. Let's say we're working on the brand colors. What's the primary color, secondary color, tertiary color, neutral color, accent color? I'll go through those color palettes and show them why these color palettes, might be like 3 different sets, why these 3 sets of colors will work for their brand and how to separate them from their competition. Okay, so
Hmm.
I do a lot of education as we go through this process, so it's not worked in a vacuum space.
Yeah. Well, and yes, I think it would be interesting to listen to you share how you go through a naming process. And you also made me think of something earlier you said about how Apple, I wrote it down a second ago, Apple was saying Apple computer, and they dropped the computer because it was too limiting. So this sounds like a very important exercise. How do you do this?
Oh, so yeah, exactly right. So that gets into the brand architecture I was talking about. So I get into this whole brand architecture. What is the architecture of your business with your brand? Some companies don't have one brand. Some companies have different sub brands, and some companies have some future brands. And so exactly what you're saying is like, how can a name travel from the standpoint, is there any limitations? So Apple Computer was a limitation because a computer limited to how people would think of them only as a computer company. Of course, we
Yeah.
know they're way beyond that. Okay. So they were very lucky because they were able to drop computer and get known for what they're known for all along, which is Apple. Okay. So yes, a naming process is extremely important. So I'm working with a client right now. He doesn't particularly like the names, but the point being, each name works based on a position. I'm more interested in what's going to work and flourish the company and grow the company as rapidly as possible. Right?
Well, yeah. So and getting it right early is probably helpful. Is it too late at some point for me to ask you to come and help?
No, it's never too late. It's never too late. I work with companies in any stage that they're in with their business, pure startups to companies that are already going to an exit strategy that want to create more value behind their brand, and everything in between. Okay, so it's never too late. What happens though, when we work with a company, we actually change its trajectory. So at the beginning, it's always best because they don't have to make these multi-million dollar mistakes, $1,000 mistakes, even more. And then when it's a company that's in existence for 25 years, I work at companies that are literally a couple generations old. We could still radically change its trajectory so they're earning a lot more revenue than any of the previous years. Not like 10%, it could be a 10x. I've actually had reports and testimonies of 2000x. Okay. So that's what I mean by multiplier.
Yeah, that's a multiplier.
Hey, listeners, don't forget to subscribe to email if you haven't already. Do this at dearbusinesscoachpodcast.com. And if you are a new subscriber, look for the magazine coming up. You can get a free download as a new subscriber. That's dearbusinesscoachpodcast.com. Thanks so much, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, you are a superstar.
So it multiplies like such an exponential rate than traditional. When most companies, 5%, 10%, great. What happened if you grew 200%, 300%, 10x, 100x, right? So because again, most companies don't understand the world of branding. It's a very complex world. They're not building a brand. Well, let's put it this way. They're not building a world-class leading brand just yet to fulfill on their potential.
So when I contact you, if I am, well, first of all, I know I can buy your book, so I want to make sure that I have the right details for listeners. But I would like to know, like when I go to howcreative.com, you have a free consultation button here. Is that a good button to use?
Yeah, exactly. So when you click on that free consultation button, you just fill that out, what you're looking for, what interests you. It's a very short form, and you click on, how can I support you? Is it upgrade? Is it creation? Is it makeover? And so that gives me an idea of what you're interested in. Okay. And then, so that's for the free consultation. We'll just have like a 20-minute call to get you started in the right direction, right? And then if you go to like services and you click on services in a menu bar and you click apply here for your online assessment, okay? This is where I do a full 1 hour with clients and I'll review all their touch points, their websites, their funnels, their marketing, their social media. It's based on time. We get a lot done in an hour, and I record the whole session. And I usually do this for $2,500, but under the coupon it says apply coupon. If you put an HOW and hit apply, it brings it all the way down to $500.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's a radical discount, and it's a 1 hour with me. We set it up, we use Zoom, and I literally will go over your website and tell you all the things that are missing per se to increase its value and to get better sales. Okay. Or let's just tell your social media how and what's missing from the standpoint of creating integrated look and feel. And then your logo, I could go over your logo. I could go over a lot of times people's sales and funnel systems as
Mm.
well. I basically there's four pillars that I being a whole brain thinker that I look at constantly is the business, their business model, the brand, the marketing, which I call customer strategies, and sales. So I always look at, well, what's the balance between these four pillars? And I look at when I do these assessments, I go over any one of those pillars, or I focus on just one or focus on all four.
So, and now you also, I'm a book nerd, so I I like to talk about your what am I publication as well. And what you said earlier too was that you think that your book content has become more relevant. So tell me about what's in the book.
Okay, so when I wrote this book, so back in the day when I started branding, was literally, I'm not kidding you, was about 35 years ago. Branding became popular about 7 years ago, but I've been branding because that's where I started working with Fortune 500 companies, representing them with my company from, Apple to HP to Xerox to, HBO, Paramount, Columbia Pictures, the list goes on, right? So I was helping them go global by helping them by literally our company coming up with more creative solutions to get them more known. Okay.
Hmm.
And using the computer, the Macintosh computer, because no one could break the code how to get film used out of it. But the point being is this is that that's where I started, and then I started to build out other companies. But when I started to look there, when books were around, there's a bookstore in Santa Monica called Hennessy and Eagle. It's my favorite bookstore. They had the coolest books from all over the world, one of a kind books. And I was in the branding section, right? There's no books in brand. This is actually 27 years ago, not 37 years ago. 27 years ago, I was looking at books for branding, and I think there was only like 3 or 4 books. One of them actually is still a very good book, I think. It's called Strong Brands. But there really weren't any books on branding. And the second thing is the books I did look at and read, they didn't show you like how to build a vision statement, how to build a brand promise. And so I wanted to, and then they didn't talk about two, and I could see what was going to happen, why these elements were important. Because I knew before Enron and MCI collapsed, what was going to happen is that there's going to be more choices for companies. There's going to be more companies out there for more choice for the consumer to use. So companies had to be, in a sense, not about money, but have to look from the standpoint what difference are going to make for people. Okay.
Hmm.
I knew this huge shift was going to happen where the power is going to be coming to the people, rather the opposite, where there's few products and few businesses where they dominate the space. Okay. So I knew there's going to be more products and there's going to be more choices, right? And those choices are going to be voted by the consumer. And those consumers are going to choose the companies that have a philosophy that really stand for something. So that's when I started writing this book. And where I want to write it where there's a soul behind the company. Okay. And now, if you look at the younger generations, the millennials, which they're called the X generation, and then you got, excuse me, the Y generation, and then you got the Z generation. The Y generation and the Z generation, the first thing to look at when they're looking at a business is they're looking at their philosophy, which is why do they do what they do? It has nothing to do with money. And that's the reason why I said my book called Authentic Branding that could be found. The easiest place to find my book, Authentic Branding, is on Amazon. It's sold globally, but
Yeah.
bookstores don't exist so much anymore. But under Howard A. Lim. So if you look under Authentic Branding under Howard A. Lim, you'll find my book, and it's helped out so many businesses. Because they get a lot of juicy stuff to how I built multi-million dollar in several billion-dollar companies from my formulas. Okay. It points people and gives them knowledge they didn't have before. And that's the reason why I created my book, is to help out as many companies as possible. Because my vision is what I found is that when people when when the economy is strong, people are just happier. So I said, well,
Hmm.
what makes economy stronger is when there's more healthy businesses. And what I found too is I found that most companies fail or reach a lid in the first 2 to 5 years, over 90% of companies. So my vision is reversing that, inverting that number. And that's why I do what I do. And then that's the reason why I created my company, is to overcome those barriers.
Excuse me. 1 second.
No problem. No problem.
Okay. Woo. Okay. I have my heater running and I think I'm getting dry air.
Oh
Okay.
gosh, yeah, I know what you
Excuse
mean.
me. Well, I'm looking at it right now and excuse me.
Oh, take your time. Do you need to get a water? Get some
Yeah, let
water?
me do that real quick.
Yeah, okay, Elizabeth. Yeah, so you're right. So the first thing is that when I pick a client, like they have to be passionate what they do, and then they gotta operate out of integrity, be coachable, make a difference in people's lives, and have fun on the way. So those are
Mm,
my. It's not the size of the company I work with. I work all the way down to solopreneurs to big company, really big companies, right? Um, and so it's more about like who they are and what difference they're making and how much they believe in themselves. Okay.
mm,
What the difference they can make with their product, service, or information. Okay. And you're absolutely right. So a lot of times, literally, because I vision this, I could see things that they can't see. I could see their blind spots. And so
mm,
I help guide them through what could have been a challenge. I guide them through, you could say, what's going to give them the ability to maximize their potential. Okay. And let's remove any obstacles by actually building the right and designing the right brand from the beginning. So you're right. So I look at things from the standpoint of my client's vision and philosophy, and that's what guides us. It's not the ego. It's more about looking at this brand like a person, and it's going to have its own life. Okay. And it's going to have its own set of values. It's going to have its own way of attracting and creating experience. By the way, there's only two ways you could build a company: one that's based on price and one that's based on quality value. And there's only one that could be based on price, like Walmart, because the margins are so thin, okay? And you have to produce a massive amount of products, okay, to be able to master that space. Everybody else has to be measured on quality, okay? And most companies don't know how to get there as far as how to express their quality, their value, their product or service as a quality, and express it in a way that people understand in a matter of seconds.
mm. Yeah, well, excuse me, you're right about price versus quality. Like there's only one who's going to be able to do that.
Right.
So it's not just, excuse me, it's not just Walmart. It's just who's ever in front with the cheapest price, right? For the most part. But um what I would like to ask, what I'd like to ask you is, I'm, as a closing statement, I guess, I'm hearing a lot that you are you're saying that, we do, if first of all, I think that if I'm coming to you, if I'm interested in learning from you, if I'm interested in buying your book and looking at your website, then I do have a feeling and a sense of what this vision and quality is. So I would think that if I'm clicking on your site, I'm already a little bit halfway there mentally, right? I'm excited to work with Howard because I feel a connection in that vision seeking. So what I was asking you earlier too is you've given us the coupon for the assessment if I were to use your website there. And also when I do that, Am I going to be receiving time with you? Can I connect with you? Um, um, like you have a blog on here too. Can I follow you socially as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, yes, you're right. So when you fill out if you do plan on doing an online brand assessment with me, at that deal I said that would be reduced to $500 from $2,500. Yeah, you'd be working with me one-on-one. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it'd be me one-on-one and be working like this on Zoom, and I'll be marking up your website and telling you what changes to make. And a lot of times the person, if they have a company that's more than just who they are, they'll invite like their marketing team, their sales team, their operations, and they'll all be getting value from when we do this online Zoom brand assessment call. And then the recording, it all gets recorded and it gets sent to you. The recording gets sent. So then you could actually review it. Cause I do talk fast because a lot of things I want to go over. And then when people do, they just keep replaying it and going, okay, I see what he meant by that. Let's make these changes. So yeah, that's a whole online brand assessment is designed in a way so it's creates a lot of value, but also it's recorded so people keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sorry I kept you extra long. Thanks for being patient with me. So I have howcreative.com and authentic branding available on Amazon, and that will be available in the show notes, and look out for the newsletter too. So I want to say thank you for coming to the Dear Business Coach podcast. I'm sure you have customers waiting for you.
Yeah, but thank you. It's been a real pleasure working with you, speaking with you on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I thank you so much. I'd like to talk again.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see.
Thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Elizabeth in Floyd, Virginia. This has been an episode of Dear Business Coach.